What's up, guys, and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello. My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, we're going to be chatting about all things Livy context. But before we can get into that, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. And now that you have so kindly joined this nerdy little corner of the internet, let's get into the video. So, as I say at the start of all of these episodes, I need to give you guys a disclaimer. If you are looking for a summary of Livy's histories, that is not this video. The video that I'm doing today is merely context about the man behind the work. I tend to like to do that on this channel. I like to contextualize before we get into an actual text to talk about what we know, if we know anything about the man or the writer or whoever it is behind the work. I just think that it makes it interesting to understand the world that they were coming from, whether it be their immediate world or the Roman world or the Greek world or the time period, etc., etc. So I am just here to let you guys know, if you're looking for a summary of this little book sitting behind me, then you're not going to get it here. But the episodes to follow will be summaries. So stick around, check out the channel. There will be videos for you over there. In saying that though, Livy was born around... I can't even get through this sentence anymore. Livy was born around 59 BC to around 64 BC. We genuinely do not know, but it's sometime in that period Livy is birthed into the world. So basically, if you say something around 60 BC, if you're like, yeah, Livy, born 60 BC, you're fine. People are going to know exactly what you're talking about, and they're going to think you're incredibly smart for saying that. However, as I do always say, if you are in class, if you have a teacher, if you have a professor that's like, Livy was born 59, Livy was born 61, just regurgitate whatever they say. I'm just telling you from the outside, from a general historian perspective. If you talk to anybody that knows ancient history, talk to a scholar and you say 60, you're good. And Livy dies in 17, either AD or CE, whichever one you prefer. BCE, BC, AD, CE, it's regardless. But either way, 17 AD or CE is when we date Livy's death to. Now, both of those are not actually in Rome. So he wasn't born in the city of Rome, nor did he die in the city of Rome. However, he was born, and then he died, in the northern Italian city of modern day Padua, which is here on a map in case you guys wanted to know. Livy becomes one of the most prominent and influential Roman historians ever. I mean, genuinely, if you are going to take a class on any period of Roman history, you will not escape reading some section of Livy. He has written about everything, or there are references to his work about everything, so he will come up, right? He is unbelievably important. And the reason why I want to highlight that is simply because out of all the historians on this channel that I discuss, as much as I love them, as much as I favor them, this is really, when it comes to Roman history, the guy you need to be reading as one of the first, if not the first. However, before we get to his works, very, very little is known about Livy's life. In fact, this is really piecing together the odd things that we can infer from his own writing and also where he's from, all of that kind of stuff. We tend to have to do that as historians anyways to figure people out, but in particular with Livy. Reasoning is because he's obviously not from Rome, but also, as I say, with all of these historians, they're not writing about themselves. However, we do consider Livy to be from a generally very wealthy family, considering the ancient city where Padua is was very wealthy itself, right? So because of that, we assume his family are probably wealthy. However, the time that Livy is growing up, I guess this is really great, but also like really sucks for him. It'll come back to bite him later. Is that he's growing up around the civil wars time, right? So for you guys that don't know, civil wars, the main civil wars of this period kind of go throughout. Feels like Rome is always at war, but really the really important ones around Julius Caesar's death, so 44, but also prior to that, there's lots of the stuff with Marius and Sulla, and there's a knock-on effect of that that's impacting Livy's life. And so because of that, right, he doesn't go to study in Greece. Now that seems like a really weird thing. How do I know that? Why am I mentioning that? So if you are from a rich family, in the ancient Roman world in particular, you tend to go down this path of doing law, being into rhetoric, that kind of a thing. That's why we get all these great speeches. You end up becoming a statesman, a senator, etc., 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 right? And the majority of them would go to study, at least for a portion, a year, a few months, in Greece, right? And I'm saying a few months at the least, because that is where all the intellectuals were to the Romans, right? They sent everybody there and they were like, go, learn. Now, Livy didn't do this, probably because of the civil wars, is what we assume. But again, that's up for debate. Some people have argued it must be for money purposes or whatever it is. Regardless, he doesn't go to Greece. And the reason why I'm mentioning that now is because it'll bite him in the booty when he tries to do his own translations of Greek texts in his history into Latin. And that is a main criticism, that his Greek, not on par. There are lots of really basic issues with his Greek translation that make us think there's no way he would be making those mistakes if he had gone to study in Greece for a period of time. So that's really one of the solid things that we know about him growing up, is the fact that he clearly is from a wealthy family. He doesn't go to Greece to study. He ends up having this great job, but in order to write his histories, he obviously has to move down to Rome. And we think he moves to Rome around 30 years old. Again, this is hotly debated. We have no real clue, but that's kind of what we think. He moves down there and he spends the majority of his adult life in Rome. Whilst in Rome, there is basically no evidence of Livy's early career. Unfortunately, we have no idea how he really got started when it comes to writing. However, we do know that at some point it clicks, right? At some point he decides he's going to write this incredibly expansive history of ancient Rome, of how they ended up getting to the point where they were at. So when it comes to his personal life, though, if you think he's going to be a writer, around this time in Rome, there are lots of very, very prominent writers, not only historians, but also, people who are writing more literature, like think Virgil, think Horace, all those people are kind of around at this period of time. And looking into Livy's personal life, it doesn't seem like he was part of those social circles whatsoever. That's not to say that he wasn't as prominent, because he absolutely was. However, he's never referenced as, being at dinners with them, which, in case you guys didn't know, a lot of them are referenced as being at dinners with one another or knowing each other really, really well. Livy, on the other hand, seems to really keep to himself, right? He's obviously around at this time. He's not really partying with all the people that we would assume he'd be partying with. However, we do know that he ends up having a relationship with the princeps, with the emperor Augustus. Now, this is really interesting because we're not really sure if Augustus liked him or not, for a number of different reasons, which I'll come to in a second. But the relationship between the two of them is, up for debate, up for discussion. We're not really entirely sure. However, we do know that it was clearly good enough that he kind of stayed tagged to the royal family for quite a while, to the point where the fourth emperor of Rome, Claudius, he actually is very, very influenced directly by Livy. Livy seemed to have had a really big impact on Claudius's life. Caligula hated him. So not really saying all that much. Caligula hated everybody. But what I'm trying to tell you is that when it comes to his personality and his personal life, it seems like Livy was really just kind of off on his own. He wanted to do his little project. He wanted to do his little writing thing. And he was very happy doing that alone. When it comes to the book itself, Livy's history of Rome is huge. Well, okay, it once was, when it was in its entirety. It's not. Spoiler alert. He wrote this incredible 142 volume history of Rome. And we think that he kind of got the idea around 29 BC to write it. And it took him a considerable amount of time. However, considering he published 142 volumes, it indicates that he would have published around 3 or 5 in a year. It's just mental how fast he was writing these things. As I just mentioned though, we don't have Livy in all its entirety. So a number of the books are lost to us. In fact, books 11 to 20 and then books 46 to 142 are completely lost, which is very, very upsetting, considering you know what all of them were about, thanks to summaries and thanks to references. So I'm going to let you guys know what you can expect from Livy. Obviously not including the lost books, that would be silly, but you can find summaries of these books. So anyways, Books 1 to 5. These get into the foundation of the city until the sack of Rome by the Gauls, which is around 368 BC. Books 6 to 10 are the Samnite Wars. 11 to 15 are the conquest of Italy. 16 to 20 is when we finally go overseas and we get the first Punic War, first Carthaginian War. We then go into books 21 to 30, which is the second Punic War, so down to 201 BC. 31 to 45 are the events until the end of the war with Perseus in 167 BC. 46 to 70, the events of the Social War. 71 to 80 are the civil wars until the death of Marius, which is 86 BC. 81 to 90, the civil wars until the death of Sulla in 78 BC. 91 to 103 are the events until the triumph of Pompey in 62 BC. 104 to 108 are the last years of the Republic. 109 to 116 are the civil wars until the murder of Caesar. 117 to 133 are the death of Julius Caesar, up until the Battle of Actium, which is in 31 BC. And then the final book, so 134 to 142, date to, well, from 29 BC up to 9 BC. Now, remember earlier how I was like, we don't really know what his relationship to Augustus is. It's because of these final books. And these were dramatic, according to the summaries, right? So these final books with those dates were supposedly like a scathing review of Augustus. They had to be published after he died, and they were a lot. So we don't have those that survive, but this is what the summaries tell us, that it was like an interesting take on Augustus, and that's why it's like, did they get on? Did they not get on? It seems like Livy was attached to this royal family, as I said earlier, and yet still was very comfortable being like, fuck Augustus. I don't actually know what he wrote in it, right? But that's kind of the general consensus going on there. So just to kind of do a little bit of a side note here, how is it that we have all these summaries, and why do we have all these summaries of the lost books of Livy so we know what we're missing? Well, because Livy wrote 142 volumes, this was literally like on publication was seen as being unbelievably important. And so throughout history, people were reading them, they were reproducing them. When we get to around the 3rd century, 4th century CE, we have a number of scholars, librarians, all those sorts of people who start writing summaries because the books were so difficult to navigate, right? So we start getting these big, long, essentially blurbs. I don't know how else to describe it. They're not super, super long and super detailed like, you know, when you go online and you find a summary like my summaries. They're not like that, but they give us a really good idea of what actually happens in these books. And so because of that, thanks to the grammarians, thanks to the librarians, we do have these first-hand reports of people who had read the books that are in question, right, whatever happens to be, and they tell us exactly what was to be expected from those volumes. So thankfully that happened. So we're not like, oh, I think it was this. It probably makes sense it was this. We know, and it's amazing. I mean, amazing to a certain extent, because obviously you can't read it, but regardless. So we've done Livy as a man, trying to piece together his early life. We've done exactly what you guys can expect from the histories, but it's probably important to dive into what makes him special and what makes him different. And to be quite honest, it's so vital that I highlight to you guys now, even though we've discussed a lot of historians on the channel thus far, and we will continue to, at this particular moment of history, discussing history was very, very popular. So unlike Herodotus, where he's the first person to do this, or Thucydides, who had a different take on it, or so on and so forth, you know, going from the Greek historians through to the Roman historians, there's nothing really new about Livy in that respect. Right, he's doing what other people had done before him, which is to write down the histories. And I mean, this was so popular, we even have people like Julius Caesar, who when he wasn't running around and doing all of his battles, he was writing his own history. I mean, you cannot take Latin without being forced to read De Bello Gallico. It's not difficult, but by God, there's so many fields, so much walking, and you're like, really? But that's my point, right? My point is that everybody seems to be doing this. And what made Livy so different is, one, how long his history was, right? Like, he was very unafraid to just be like, here it all, I'm going to write it all down. Don't you worry, guys. It's all in one place. You just have to read mine. You don't have to read anybody else's. But also, Livy was really focused on the morality element of his histories, which not necessarily different because people like Sallust also did this. However, it was new to do it in such a long form, right? He was really focused on the moral components of history and not necessarily on the political maneuvers that we had seen most other historians focus on, which is, oh, this thing happened, and then this was the knock-on effect from, the inside telling the outside. That was a horribly phrased sentence, but I mean, like, people who are on the inside of these things, who are in all the meetings saying, this is all the plotting that happened, then we executed this plan and this is what, it looked like, kind of a thing, right? So Livy isn't doing that. He's focusing more so on the morality behind each movement and discussing why or where or, all of that kind of stuff from that angle, which, like I said, isn't necessarily new. Sallust was doing it. Other historians had done it as well. I'm just mentioning Sallust. Did that video go live yet? I don't know, but I do have a Sallust video is what I'm trying to say. And also lots of literary authors were doing this at the time as well, like literature-based authors. If you guys read the Aeneid, which we've done on the channel, then he's really focused on morality, because that is, the whole book is just like Roman propaganda, right? But that whole thing is looking into the morality elements of the building of Rome. So that's sort of what Livy was doing. What was really special is just how long it was, how much he was writing, and how much he was trying to tell people in his version of history. Now, of course, that does not come without issues, without complaints, and without incredibly valid ones. And in particular, with Livy, there are some very important things to point out. First things first, Livy is not a senator. Now, I know that might seem like I'm looking down my nose at him and I'm like, ugh. No, this is actually very, very important, because since he wasn't a senator, he didn't actually have access to everything he would need in order to write his history as accurately as possible. So things like minutes in, senatorial meetings, minutes in the law courts. Like, he didn't have access to any of those things. He didn't have access to very specific law documents, all of that kind of stuff that he does discuss those things in his histories, but he didn't actually have the reference for it. And actually, that was a complaint that a lot of ancient historians had about Livy as well. A lot of them said that he wasn't worth the read because he wasn't a real historian, because he wasn't really checking all of these things. Although he had access to public records, so like Polybius and all these sorts of people, he could read those, regurgitate, and figure out his angle on everything. It wasn't as detailed and accurate as we would hope, is how I'm going to phrase that. Now, not only was Livy not a senator, but he also didn't hold any political public audience, which is really, really interesting. And that's what makes his perspective so fascinating for us historians to read. That even though, yes, a lot of ancient historians look down on him, a lot of modern historians, not us, but I mean later, everything after 200 AD is modern to me, just so that you guys know. So everything in that period where people are kind of reading Livy as like, this is our one-stop shop, they had very valid complaints on that front, because he did not have his nose in the action where it should have been, right? He was not actively a part of all of these spheres, which would have probably helped the text in a certain way. But because he wasn't, a lot of people just discredited his work, which also probably explains why, as I said in his little personal life, he just liked to be alone. I would too. If I was writing 142 volumes and every time I published one, there was some asshole in the corner that was like, yeah, but he didn't have access to this law, I would be like, bro, you do it then. Stop complaining. You write it down. And to Livy's credit, he does tell us that he is coming at history from more so a personal perspective in the preface of the book, of the whole histories. He says, this is the lens that I'm telling history through. So either way, what I'm trying to say is that there are some valid complaints. There were always some valid complaints when it comes to these historians. And when it comes to Livy, he wrote so much. And a lot of it, we can at least get some version of some kind of story, because Livy was a great storyteller, okay? When it comes to even his style, in the Latin, which I know I'm not going to make you guys read, that would be ludicrous. We're not here to do that. But his Latin is really interesting because he'll go on like these really like long tangents where he'll have these like beautiful long lines, similes, all of this description. And then he'll cut to being like incredibly staccato, incredibly short, pithy, fast. And then he'll be like long again and all of this. So he is a really enjoyable read. I don't actually remember how I started that sentence, but what I'm trying to tell you... Oh, no, that's what I was saying about the preface, right? So he tells you in the preface what he's trying to do. His style's really interesting. Is he brand spanking new? The answer is no. But do you have to read him in order to get through any ancient history course? Absolutely. And is his writing very interesting in the original language? It absolutely is. It's very, very unique in that way. So there are lots of things that draw people to Livy outside of just, here's the history. It is also an enjoyable read. Not as wacky, obviously, as like Herodotus. There are some wacky things. Some little wacky things where you're like, I bet if you had access to that record, you would have found the real story and it probably isn't that weird, Livy. I don't think so. But look, we're all here for a good time, right? Anyways, Livy was always an individualist. He was going against the grain. He very much sat with himself and he wasn't really fussed about anybody else was doing. And he was very happy just being Livy and just writing his version of events in the corner of the literary world, having his foot in the door in all of these different places, but still staying true to himself and true to what he believed should be part of the narrative of history. So, with all that being said, I will love you and leave you with this context episode because in the episodes to come, we will be diving into the histories, actually what's on the page. I will not be offering any analysis. We are just going to be diving into what Livy wrote down and summarizing that for you. So as I say at the end of all of these episodes, if you guys want more analysis, then let me know in the comments below because then I can go on a search for a scholar, a professor who I think would be really good to talk to you guys about that side of Livy, just so that we as, you know, a little team, a little community can just focus on summarizing what's on the page and not fussing too much with the analysis until we get somebody who's way more qualified to come on and talk about that. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to be giving you guys some Livy videos on the channel in the future. And I hope you have a lovely day. I'll see you guys next time.